This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could live in comfort. I thought when I grew old, he would give me love and respect in return. But one night, he looked me in the eye, picked up his dirty shoes, and threw them at my head. He laughed with his friends as I sat humiliated in my own home. My heart broke, but I was not powerless. I stood up, and you won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I was not born rich. I came from a small village where every coin mattered, and every day was a fight to put food on the table. When my son was born, I told myself I would give him a life better than mine. I worked day and night in fields, in factories, on building sites, and later in a small shop that I opened with my own hands. I saved every bit of money I could, not for myself, but for him. I wore the same old clothes for years so that he could wear new ones. I ate plain bread so that he could eat meat. I walked long miles so he could ride to school in comfort. Every step I took, I thought of his future. When the winter was cold, I went without a blanket just so I could buy him a pair of warm shoes. When the summer was hot, I sweated in the sun, my back breaking under the weight of heavy work. But in my mind, I was calm because I knew the money I earned was for his schooling, his books, his better life. I gave him the best schools I could afford. I paid the high fees even when I had to borrow or delay paying my own bills. When he failed in one exam, I told him not to lose hope, and I found a tutor. When he wanted new shoes, I bought them even if I had to skip a meal. I still remember patching his shoes when he was small, sewing them with thread because I did not want him to feel poor among other children. I never bought new shoes for myself, but for him, I bought them every year. I believed a father must carry the burden so his child can walk free. When he grew older and wanted to study in the city, I let him go, though it broke my heart to be alone. I sent him money every month, even if it meant I had nothing left for myself. I trusted him. I told myself that all this pain and sacrifice would bring me joy later, when I would see him grown into a man who would respect me, care for me, and stand by me in my last years. I thought I was building a bond stronger than stone. I thought he would see my tired hands, my bent back, and my old shoes, and he would feel love and gratitude. I thought he would never let me down. When he got his first job, I was so proud that I cried alone in my room. I told people, "My son is working. My son will take care of me now." I thought my work was over, that I had fulfilled my duty as a father. I even gave him the shop I had built with my hands, thinking it was time for him to carry on. I thought he would respect the years I had spent for him. But what I gave him was not just money, not just things. I gave him my body, my health, my youth. Every wrinkle on my face, every ache in my bones was the result of my work for him. I believed that this would come back to me as kindness in my old age. I never asked for riches, only for respect, only for love. I thought my son was the living proof of all that I had given. Every time I looked at him, I felt my sacrifices had meaning. I thought he was my blessing. I thought he was my comfort for the last years of my life. But I was wrong. As my son grew older, I started to notice small changes in him. At first, they were small things, so small that I told myself not to worry. He would come home and not greet me. He would eat the food his mother cooked but not thank her. He would roll his eyes when I told him old stories. I thought it was just youth, just a phase, just the way young people are. But as the years passed, those small things grew into something bigger. Respect turned into silence, silence turned into coldness, and coldness turned into mockery. My son began to look at me, not as his father, but as some old man in his way. When guests came to the house, he spoke over me. If I tried to share wisdom, he laughed and said, "Times have changed, old man." The words cut me like a knife, but I stayed quiet. I told myself, he is young. He will learn. At family gatherings, he made jokes about me. "Look at father," he would say. "He still wears shoes with holes." People laughed, and I forced myself to smile, but inside my heart burned. I remembered the nights I stayed awake patching his shoes. The days I worked with blisters on my hands so he could walk proudly. And now the same boy laughed at me for being poor, for being old, for being nothing. He started to talk about money often. "When you go, father," he once said, "I will be set for life. Your land, your shop, your savings, they will all be mine." He said it with a grin, like it was a joke, but the way his eyes shone with greed made me shiver. I did not raise him to speak like this. I did not raise him to think of me as a wallet. But I kept silent because I loved him. I told myself he was my only son. Over time, he stopped helping me with small things. When I asked him to bring me medicine, he said he was too busy. When I asked him to walk with me to the market, he said I slowed him down. He started to go out late at night with friends, coming back drunk, laughing loud, disturbing the peace of the house. Sometimes his friends would come too, sitting in my living room, drinking, throwing bottles on the floor. When I asked them to be quiet, my son said, "Don't listen to the old man. He doesn't understand fun." They all laughed. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. My chair was no longer mine. My voice was no longer heard. My presence was no longer respected. I was the man who built the house, but now I was treated as if I was a burden in it. My son even told me once, "Father, you don't need to go outside. People think you are weak, and it makes me look bad." He cared more about what people thought of him than about my dignity. The words became sharper. The laughter became louder. The distance became wider. My son's love for me turned into disdain, and his disdain grew into open disrespect. When relatives visited, he would make fun of the way I walked, hunched and slow. "Look at the old man," he would say. "One strong wind will blow him away." Everyone laughed. I sat quietly, my face smiling but my heart bleeding. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders when he was small, his little hands pulling at my hair, his laughter filling my ears. I remembered feeding him with my own hands when he was sick, praying to God that he would survive. I remembered selling my last piece of jewelry to pay his school fee. I remembered telling people proudly, "That is my son." And now the same son made me feel like I was nothing. Day by day, the house that I built with sweat and sacrifice turned into a place of humiliation. My son did not see me as a father anymore. He saw me as weak, useless, and in his way. Every word from him was heavy with sarcasm. Every look from him was filled with disdain. My heart broke slowly, piece by piece, but I stayed silent because I loved him. I told myself, maybe tomorrow he will change. Maybe tomorrow he will remember all I did. Maybe tomorrow he will treat me with love again. But tomorrow never came. Instead, the distance grew into cruelty, and cruelty grew into violence. One evening, after a long day, I sat quietly in the corner of the living room. My body was tired, my legs weak, and my head heavy. I had spent the day trying to clean the yard and fix some broken things around the house. My son came home with his friends. They were laughing loudly, talking big, and acting proud. I watched them from my chair and thought to myself, these young men have strong bodies, full of energy, full of life. How different I am now, weak and bent, yet I once carried the same strength for my family. I wanted to feel part of them, to be noticed, to be respected as the father who made all of this possible. When they sat down, my son kicked off his shoes, leaving them in the middle of the floor. I asked gently, "Son, please pick up your shoes and place them near the door." My voice was soft, not angry, only a small request from an old man who wished for a little order in his home. My son looked at me with sharp eyes, as if my words were an insult. His friends went silent for a moment, then one of them laughed. My son's face changed from annoyance to a cruel smile. He picked up one shoe and tossed it in his hand like a toy. "Oh, so the old man gives orders now?" he said. His friends chuckled. My heart sank, but I still spoke calmly. "I only ask for respect. I worked hard to raise you, my son." The words seemed to light fire in him. He stood up, holding his shoes. His eyes were not of a son, but of a stranger full of anger. He raised his arm, and without warning, he threw one shoe straight at my head. The impact was not strong, but the shock made me freeze. Before I could react, the second shoe followed, striking me again. The pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. My son's friends burst into laughter, clapping, pointing, treating it as if it were a game. And my son, my own blood, my only child, he laughed the loudest. In that moment, the room spun. I was not just an old man hit with shoes. I was a father betrayed. My mind traveled back in time to the years I bent over in fields so he could wear shoes. I saw myself patching his little sandals with thread so his feet would not touch the ground. I saw him sleeping in my lap, safe and warm, while I prayed for his health. And now those same hands, those same feet I once carried, had turned into weapons of mockery against me. I sat still, my hand touching the side of my head where the shoe had hit. It was not the strike that hurt me. It was the sound of laughter filling the room. Laughter that told me I was worthless. Laughter that told me I was no longer a father, no longer respected, no longer needed. Neighbors passing by the open window heard the noise. Relatives who lived close by looked in. They saw me sitting small in my chair, shoes at my feet, my son standing tall and proud in front of his friends. My shame was not private. It was public. It was complete. I wanted to speak, to say something that would make him remember love, but no words came. My throat was dry. My heart was heavy. I could only sit in silence while the laughter grew louder. My son pointed at me and said, "See this old man? He thinks he still matters." The words crushed me more than the shoes ever could. I lowered my eyes, not to cry in front of them, but inside me, the tears burned. The night passed slowly. His friends finally left, but the sound of their laughter stayed in my ears. My son walked past me as if nothing had happened. No apology, no shame, only arrogance. He closed the door to his room, leaving me alone in the darkness. I sat there, staring at the shoes on the floor. Those shoes became a symbol. They were not leather, not cloth, not thread. They were proof that my son saw me as nothing. I thought of all the sacrifices, all the years, all the nights without food, all the mornings without rest. I thought of every coin I saved, every drop of sweat I shed. And all of it ended in this moment, an old man struck with shoes by the very boy he gave everything to. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. My heart ached with grief. I whispered to myself, "This is what my life has come to." I felt like a man who had planted a tree, watered it, cared for it, protected it from storms, only to sit in its shade one day and have the branches fall upon his head. The shoe incident was not just an act of anger. It was the peak of years of disdain. It was the final proof that my son no longer saw me as his father. He saw me as a weak old man to laugh at, to insult, to use. It was the moment my hope died. The bond I thought unbreakable was broken. The respect I thought eternal was gone. The love I thought certain was no more. And in that silence, in that humiliation, I began to feel something else rise inside me. It was not anger, not rage, but something colder, sharper, steadier. It was the thought that I still had one thing left: control. My son might laugh today, but he had forgotten that tomorrow was still mine to shape. After the shoe incident, I sat in my chair for a long time. My hand stayed on my head where the shoe had struck me, but the real pain was not in my body. The real pain was in my heart. I did not bleed. I did not fall. But I felt as if something inside me had broken into pieces that could never be fixed. I looked at the shoes lying on the floor. They were not just shoes anymore. They were symbols of disrespect, symbols of betrayal, symbols of all my wasted sacrifices. I had given my son shoes when he was little. I had polished them, patched them, and carried him on my shoulders so his feet never touched the mud. And now, the same boy had thrown shoes at my head. The room was silent after his friends left. Only the sound of the clock on the wall ticked in the darkness. Tick, 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 like it was counting every second of my shame. I wanted to cry, but my eyes were dry. I wanted to shout, but my throat was tight. My body felt weak, but my mind was racing. I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? How did my son become this person? I remembered the times I had held his little hands, the nights I had carried him when he was sick, the mornings I had worked without rest so he could eat well. All those memories clashed with the image of him standing tall, laughing with his friends, while I sat broken with shoes at my feet. Neighbors who had seen it would whisper about me. Relatives who heard of it would shake their heads. People who once respected me as a hard-working man would now say, "Look how his own son treats him." My shame was no longer mine alone. It was spread across the town, like dirt thrown into the wind. That thought made my chest heavy. For an old man, dignity is all that is left, and mine had been crushed in front of everyone. I sat there, replaying the moment again and again in my mind. The laughter, the mocking words, the sting of leather on my head. I tried to imagine it was a dream, that maybe it never happened, that maybe I would wake up and find myself years back when my son was small and still loved me. But it was not a dream. It was the truth. And truth is sharper than any knife. In that shock, my mind started to wander through the years. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders to school. I remembered walking barefoot so he could have shoes. I remembered his little voice calling me Papa with love. Each memory was like a nail driven into my chest. How could that boy turn into this man? How could love turn into cruelty? How could respect turn into laughter? But then, beneath the sadness, a new thought appeared. It was cold. It was steady. It was clear. My son believed he had won. He believed I was powerless. He believed he could throw shoes at me and laugh because in his mind the future was his. He thought all my work, all my savings, all my property would belong to him one day. He thought my name, my effort, my sacrifice would all pass into his hands like water flowing downhill. But he was wrong. He had forgotten something very important. He had forgotten that I was still alive, and as long as I was alive, I still had control. I realized, sitting there in the quiet, that I had been blind for too long. I had hoped he would change. I had hoped he would remember love. But hope was nothing but chains on my heart. His actions that night were the final truth. He did not love me. He did not respect me. He saw me as weak. He saw me as a burden. He saw me only as the old man who guarded the keys to his inheritance. And when I understood that, I felt something inside me change. It was not anger. Anger burns fast and then dies. It was not sadness. Sadness crushes and leaves you weak. It was something stronger. It was resolve. It was a decision waiting to be made. My son thought the future was his, but I knew then that I still held it in my hands. The deeds of the land, the papers of the shop, the accounts in the bank, the will that carried my name. All of it was still under my control, and control is power. I sat still in that quiet night, but my mind was no longer quiet. My son had thrown shoes at my head to prove I was powerless. But in truth, he had only reminded me of the power I still had. The power to decide where my life's work would go. The power to decide who would carry my name. The power to decide who would walk with dignity and who would be left with nothing. That night, in my quiet shock, I made no sound. I spoke no words. But inside me, a fire had been lit. A fire not of rage, but of determination. He had laughed at me. But soon, he would not laugh. Soon, he would understand what it means to take everything for granted. Soon, he would learn that when you strike a father's head with shoes, you strike away your own future. As I sat in my chair that night, still hearing the echo of my son's laughter, I began to think not about the pain, but about the truth of my situation. My son thought he had all the power. He thought because I was old, because I was weak, because I depended on him to bring food from the market or carry heavy bags, that I had no control left in my life. But he was blind. He forgot something very important. He forgot that everything he enjoyed, every roof over his head, every piece of land, every coin in the bank, still carried my name, not his. The land deed of the house we lived in was mine. It was bought with my sweat, signed with my hand. His name was not on it. The small shop that fed us for years, the shop I had built with bricks and labor, still belonged to me. The bank account, though he thought of it as his future, was still under my signature. The will, the paper that would decide who gets what when I die, was still in my control. My son had forgotten these things because he believed time was on his side. He thought he just had to wait. He thought the future was already written for him. But I knew the truth. The future is not written until the ink is dry, and the ink was still in my hand. I realized then that while my body was weak, my position was strong. I held levers that could change everything. My son thought he could insult me, humiliate me, and still enjoy my inheritance. He thought I was too old to fight back. He thought I had no power left. But my power was not in my fists. It was in my choices. It was in my pen. It was in the law that still recognized me as the owner. I thought back to all the times I had seen greedy children destroy families. I remembered stories of old men tricked into signing papers, leaving everything to ungrateful sons who then threw them out of their own homes. I remembered neighbors who lost their land because their own blood cheated them. I had always thought my son would never do such things. But that night, I saw clearly he would. Maybe not with a pen, but with his actions. He had already declared war on me, and in that war, I was not defenseless. I sat in silence, but my mind was sharp. I thought of the lawyer I knew in town, a man who had helped me with small matters years ago. I thought of the bank manager who still called me sir when I walked in. I thought of the officials who still respected my name because they remembered the years I worked hard to build my life. All of them would listen to me, not to my son, because the law still saw me, not him, as the owner. And so I began to see the levers in my hands. They were not made of wood or iron. They were made of paper, signatures, and decisions. I could pull them quietly, without a word to my son, and turn his entire world upside down. He could laugh today, but I could make sure tomorrow he cried. He could throw shoes at me, but I could make sure one day he begged for bread. I also thought of something else. My son had no gratitude, but there were others who had shown me respect. A nephew who always greeted me with honor. A young girl in the neighborhood who helped carry my bags without asking for money. A charity that fed the poor, who thanked me even for small donations. These people valued me more than my own blood. If I wanted, I could give my legacy to them. And they would carry my name with respect, not mockery. The more I thought, the calmer I became. My son believed I was powerless, but in truth, he was standing on land he did not own, eating food paid for by money not his, and living under a roof that I could take away with one decision. He was a man who laughed while standing on a bridge, forgetting that I was the one holding the ropes of that bridge. If I let go, he would fall. That night, as the quiet wrapped around me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not shout at him. I would not fight him with hands. I would not curse him. I would do something colder. I would use the power he had forgotten I still had. I would take the inheritance he thought was already his, and I would give it to those who truly respected me. He would learn the lesson not through my words, but through the emptiness in his hands when the time came. For years, I thought my life was ending, that I was too old to make any difference. But in truth, I still had the strongest weapon of all, choice. My son had struck me with shoes, but I would strike him with silence, with signatures, with decisions he could never undo. The hidden levers were mine, and I would pull them one by one. The morning after the shoe incident, I woke up with heavy eyes, but a clear mind. My body still felt weak, but inside, I was no longer confused. For many years, I had carried hope in my heart that my son would change. I told myself again and again that he was just lost, just young, just careless. I told myself that one day he would come back to me with love and respect. But after last night, after those shoes hit my head and his laughter filled the room, I knew hope was gone. Love cannot grow where cruelty lives. Respect cannot exist where mockery rules. My son had shown me his true self, and I could not close my eyes to it anymore. I sat on my bed and thought about my life. All the years of work, all the sacrifices, all the nights I had gone hungry so he could eat, all the mornings I had walked barefoot so he could wear shoes. I had given him my youth, my strength, my health, and my dreams. And what did I get in return? Shoes thrown at my head, laughter in my face, neighbors whispering about my shame. I felt my heart ache, but with that ache came a strange calm. It was the calm of a man who had finally decided. I realized shouting at him would not work. Pleading with him would not work. Even punishing him with harsh words would not change him. Words were useless to a man who laughed at his father's pain. What he needed was not words but truth, and the truth could be delivered not through my mouth but through my choices. I told myself, enough. No more hope. No more waiting. No more forgiving cruelty. It is time to act. That morning, I put on my simple clothes, washed my face, and ate a small breakfast. I did not tell my son where I was going. I walked slowly, leaning on my stick, but every step felt stronger than the one before. I was not walking as a broken old man. I was walking as a father who had made his decision. I went to town and entered the office of my lawyer, a man I had known for many years. He looked surprised to see me, but welcomed me warmly. "What brings you here, sir?" he asked. I sat down and looked him in the eye. "I want to make changes," I said. My voice was calm, steady. I told him I wanted to remove my son from my will. I told him I wanted to protect my estate, my land, my shop, my savings, from falling into the hands of a man who disrespected me. The lawyer nodded, not with shock, but with understanding. He had seen such things before. He knew the cruelty of greedy children. We spent hours going over the papers. He explained how I could change the will, how I could move money into trusts, how I could sign new deeds to secure everything. He asked me, "Are you sure about this decision?" I answered without hesitation, "I am sure. A man who throws shoes at his father has already thrown away his inheritance." When I left his office, the sun was bright above me. I walked slowly, but felt light in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I was not a victim. I felt like I was in control. The decision was not made out of hate. It was made out of truth. My son had chosen his path, and now I was choosing mine. That night, I returned home. My son was again laughing with his friends, the sound echoing through the house. He did not ask me where I had been. He did not even look at me. But I looked at him, and for the first time I did not feel weak. I did not feel hurt. I felt calm, because I knew something he did not know. He thought he was the king of the house. He thought the future was his. But I had already taken the crown from his head and placed it somewhere else. From that day forward, I spoke less. I did not argue with him. I did not try to explain. I did not beg for respect. I simply lived quietly, carrying the secret of my decision. He continued to laugh, to mock, to boast about his future wealth. And I listened in silence, knowing that soon the truth would strike him harder than any shoe could strike me. The decision had been made. The papers were being prepared, and my son's fate had already changed, though he did not know it yet. The decision was made in my heart, but decisions mean little unless they are written in stone. I knew that if I wanted to make sure my son never touched the wealth I worked for, I had to take action with the law. Words fade, promises fade, but signed papers remain. My son thought he had all the time in the world, that when I die, everything would simply fall into his lap. He did not know that the world does not work that way. A father who still breathes still holds the power. The next week, I went back to the lawyer's office. He had prepared the documents for me, all neat and ready. The papers were heavy in my hands, heavier than any stone, because they carried the weight of my entire life. My land, my house, my shop, my bank accounts, all of them were listed on those sheets. My lawyer asked me one more time, "Do you want to remove your son completely?" I closed my eyes and thought of that night, the shoes hitting my head, his laughter filling the air, my shame in front of neighbors. My eyes opened, steady and clear. "Yes," I said, "remove him. He has removed me from his heart, so I remove him from my will." One by one, I signed the papers. My hand trembled a little, not from doubt, but from age. Yet every stroke of the pen felt strong. Every line I signed was like a wall I built between my hard-earned legacy and my ungrateful son. With each signature, I felt the weight on my chest grow lighter. It was not revenge born out of fire. It was justice written in ink. I asked my lawyer to transfer parts of my wealth into a trust so that even after I was gone, it would not be touched by greedy hands. I named charities that fed the poor, children who needed school fees, and a nephew who had always shown me respect as beneficiaries. I wanted my life's work to go to people who valued kindness, not cruelty. I wanted my name to live with honor, not be dragged through the mud by my son's arrogance. The lawyer nodded and said, "This is wise. You are protecting what is yours." I also arranged for the shop to be given to someone who truly worked hard, one of my old workers who never cheated me, a man who bowed his head when he spoke to me out of respect, not fear. My son thought that shop was his already. He had no idea that with one stroke of my pen, it was gone from his reach forever. When all was finished, the lawyer gathered the papers, sealed them, and filed them in the right places. "It is done," he said. "The law is on your side. No one can break this unless you choose to change it again." I nodded, feeling relief like cool water on a burning wound. I had taken control. I had used the law, the very system my son had ignored, to ensure he would get nothing from me. I walked out of that office taller than when I had entered. My back was still bent with age, but my spirit was straight. My son could throw 100 shoes at me. He could laugh until his voice cracked. He could tell his friends he owned the future. None of it mattered anymore. The truth was simple. The future was no longer his. I had taken it back. At home, life continued as if nothing had changed. My son still mocked me. He still bragged to his friends about the land, the shop, the money he would soon own. He still looked at me as if I was weak and worthless. But I looked at him with quiet eyes, knowing the truth. His confidence was built on sand, and I had already washed it away. One day, when the time came, he would stand in shock as he learned that his name was nowhere on the will. He would beg, he would cry, he would rage, but it would be too late. The legal move was more than a paper change. It was my final stand. I had no strength to fight him with fists, but I had the strength to fight him with law, and the law was now my shield. My son had forgotten that the world does not reward disrespect. He would learn this lesson not from my mouth, but from the cold, undeniable truth of signed documents. As I sat in my chair that night, I felt peace for the first time in years. I was no longer waiting for my son to change. I was no longer hoping for love that would never come. I was no longer chained by fear of being left alone. I had acted, I had secured my life's work, and I had ensured that when I leave this world, my son will not inherit my sweat, my blood, my sacrifice. He will inherit only the emptiness he created with his own cruelty. The day of truth always comes, no matter how long it hides. For my son, that day arrived sooner than he ever thought. He had lived for years with the belief that everything I owned was already his. He spoke to his friends about his land and his shop. He even told relatives that one day soon he would build a big house on his property. Everyone listened, some with respect, some with doubt. But he walked around with a chest full of pride, as if he had built those walls with his own hands, as if he had worked those fields with his own sweat. In truth, he had done nothing. All of it was mine, and I had already taken his name off it, though he did not know. When the lawyer finally sent the first notice, it was like thunder breaking a silent sky. My son was sitting at the table, eating and laughing with friends, when the letter arrived. I watched him open it, his face proud, expecting good news about money or land. But as his eyes moved across the page, the color drained from his face. His smile fell. His laughter stopped. His friends leaned closer, curious. And then they saw it too. The letter made it clear. He had no legal right, no name written on the deeds, no future ownership. His inheritance was gone. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He laughed nervously, waving the paper around. "This cannot be right," he said. "This is my father's land. Everyone knows it." But the lawyer's words were sharp and final. The documents had been changed, filed, and sealed. The law had spoken. My son's name was not there. His friends, who once clapped and laughed with him as he mocked me, now sat in silence. Some looked at him with pity, others with hidden smiles. The same people who once saw me as weak now saw him as a fool. He turned to me, eyes wide, voice shaking with anger. "Father, what is this? Tell them this is not true." But I stayed silent. I only looked at him, calm and steady. I did not need to speak. The papers spoke louder than any words I could ever say. My silence burned him more than my anger ever could. His friends saw him begging in front of the old man he once laughed at. They saw his pride crumble. They saw his arrogance turn to desperation. The whispers began in the town. "Did you hear? The old man cut his son out of the will. He thought he would inherit everything, but now he has nothing." The same neighbors who once pitied me now pitied him. The same relatives who once said I was too soft now nodded in respect. My son became the subject of gossip, the man who mocked his father and ended up with empty hands. He tried to argue with the lawyer, shouting, waving his arms, but the lawyer only repeated the truth. The decision was final. "Your father owns everything. Your father has chosen new beneficiaries. Nothing belongs to you." My son's voice grew weak. His anger turned into fear. He begged, "Father, please, you cannot do this. I am your son." But I looked at him and thought, "Were you my son the night you threw shoes at me? Were you my son when you laughed at my pain? Blood alone does not make a son. Respect does. Love does." And he had shown neither. The revelation spread like fire. His friends stopped visiting as often. They did not see him as powerful anymore. They saw him as a man who lost everything before it was even his. Some even mocked him behind his back, saying, "He threw away gold for laughter. He traded his inheritance for pride." The humiliation he once gave me was now his to carry. For me, it was not a moment of joy, but of justice. I did not smile. I did not laugh. I did not shout, "I told you so." I simply sat in silence, watching him learn the truth. That was enough. The pain he felt was not from my hands, but from his own actions. The inheritance was gone because he had chosen disrespect. The future was empty because he had chosen cruelty. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. No longer was I the weak old man in the corner. I was the father who had spoken through the law. And he was no longer the proud son boasting of wealth. He was the beggar, pleading for something he thought was his but had never earned. The revelation was clear to everyone. You cannot build your future on disrespect. You cannot spit on the hand that fed you and expect it to give you gold. My son had believed he could treat me like dirt and still inherit my world. But life is not so cruel to the good, nor so kind to the arrogant. He had laughed at me with shoes in his hand. Now the world laughed at him with nothing in his. When the truth finally sank into my son's heart, his world began to collapse. At first, he tried to hide it. He walked around the house with his chest still high, pretending nothing had changed. But I could see the fear in his eyes. I could see the cracks forming in his pride. He no longer spoke loudly about his land or his shop. He no longer bragged to his friends about the money he would soon inherit. Instead, he grew quiet, nervous, and restless. He would pace the floor at night, his face pale, his hands shaking. His friends, who once filled the house with laughter and mockery, began to stay away. They had no use for a man with empty hands. They came for his promises of wealth, his talk of future power, his free drinks and careless spending. But once they learned that the inheritance was gone, they vanished like smoke in the wind. My son would call them, but they made excuses. He would invite them, but they were too busy. Slowly, he was left alone, the same way he had left me alone when I needed him. He began to beg me in private. "Father, please change the will back. I was wrong. I will respect you now. I will take care of you." His voice trembled, his eyes watery, but I knew his heart had not changed. He did not want me. He wanted my money. His tears were not for love. They were for greed. I looked at him calmly and said nothing. Silence was my answer, and silence was sharper than any word I could speak. The humiliation followed him wherever he went. Neighbors whispered behind his back. Relatives who once praised him now shook their heads. He thought he would inherit everything, they said, but now he has nothing. Some even laughed openly, calling him a fool who disrespected his father and paid the price. My son, who once laughed at me in front of others, now tasted the same bitter laughter directed at him. Without inheritance, he had to face the world on his own. He looked for work, but he had no skills. He had spent his life waiting for my death instead of building his own future. Employers saw his arrogance and turned him away. He borrowed money from friends, but when he could not repay, they abandoned him. Soon he was drowning in debt. He sold small things, but it was never enough. He came home one evening with his head down, his pride broken. He asked me for money like a beggar. The same son who once threw shoes at my head now bent his head before me. I gave him no answer. I watched him squirm in the silence he once forced me to live in. He grew angry, shouting, "You are my father. You owe me this." But the truth was clear. I owed him nothing. I had already given him everything, my years, my strength, my sacrifices. What he did with it was his choice, and he had chosen mockery. His wife, who once stood beside him proudly, began to see the truth as well. She had married him for the wealth she thought was coming. When she realized there would be no mansion, no land, no easy future, her love grew cold. Their arguments shook the walls of the house. One day she packed her bags and left, taking the children with her. My son was left alone, the same way he left me alone when I needed company. He tried to fight the law, but the lawyer stood firm. The will was changed, the trust was sealed, the inheritance gone. He had no chance. He spent his days begging me, bargaining with me, even threatening me. But I remained calm, unmoved. His words, his anger, his tears, they meant nothing. The damage had been done the night he threw those shoes. Respect once broken cannot be repaired with cheap apologies. Slowly, his health began to fail. The stress of debts, the loneliness, the shame, it weighed on him. He looked older than his years. His once proud voice grew weak. His once proud body grew thin. The son who thought he owned the future now struggled to survive the present. He came to me one night, fell on his knees, and cried, "Father, I have nothing. Please forgive me." I looked at him, my heart heavy, but I remembered the sound of his laughter as he mocked me. Forgiveness is for the humble, and he had never truly been humble. The aftermath of his cruelty was not mine to bear. It was his. He had built his life on greed, on arrogance, on disrespect. And when the foundation broke, the whole house fell. The inheritance was gone. The friends were gone. The wife was gone. The respect of the community was gone. All he had left was shame, regret, and the empty echo of his own laughter haunting him in the nights. And I, the father he mocked, sat quietly with my dignity. I did not need to raise my hand against him. I did not need to curse him. His own actions had cursed him. His own cruelty had destroyed him. His downfall was not written by me, it was written by his own choices. In the end, I did not need to shout. I did not need to fight. I did not need to raise my hands or curse my son. My revenge came not through anger, but through silence and decisions made with a steady heart. I had lived long enough to know that life has its own way of punishing those who do wrong. All I had to do was guide it. I watched my son fall into the hole he dug with his own hands. He had mocked me, insulted me, and thrown shoes at my head, thinking I was powerless. But the truth was always the opposite. He was the one powerless, because he had built his future on something that did not belong to him. When I pulled it away, he was left with nothing. He learned too late that respect is the real inheritance, not land or money. Without respect, no man can keep wealth. Without respect, no man can keep family. Without respect, no man can keep peace. As the days passed, I lived quietly. I woke up early, drank my tea, sat in the sun, and listened to the birds. My son walked past me with a bent head, no longer proud, no longer laughing. He had begged, he had shouted, he had cried, but none of it changed the truth. The law had spoken, and my decision was final. I had taken my inheritance from his hands and given it to people who truly respected me. The charities fed children with it. My nephew worked honestly in the shop. Families prayed for me when they received food and help from my trust. My name lived in their mouths with blessings, not curses. This was the true victory of my life. I did not win with anger. I did not win with violence. I won with dignity. My son had taken that from me once, the night he threw his shoes. He thought I would remain broken. But I rose from that humiliation stronger than before. My strength was not in my body, which was old and weak. My strength was in my wisdom, my patience, and my pen. That strength was enough to change everything. Sometimes at night, I would think of him as a little boy again. I would remember the small hands holding mine, the innocent smile, the voice that once called me Papa with love. Those memories still hurt. But then I would remember the man he had become, the laughter, the mockery, the shoes flying at my head, and I knew I had made the right choice. Love cannot be forced. Respect cannot be begged. They must come freely. And since he had none to give, I gave him none in return. Neighbors began to respect me again. They whispered, "The old man was wise. He taught his son a lesson," relatives said. "He may be old, but his mind is sharp." I did not feel proud of cutting my son off, but I felt peace, because I knew my life's work would not be wasted in the hands of an ungrateful man. The quiet victory was not just for me. It was for every parent who has been disrespected, every elder who has been mocked, every heart that has been broken by their own children. I became proof that even in old age, you are not powerless. As long as you live, you hold the power to choose where your love, your work, and your legacy will go. No one can take that from you unless you give it away. One evening, I sat outside watching the sunset. My son came to me, his eyes hollow, his voice soft. He whispered, "Father, I am sorry." But his words were empty. They came too late. Regret after greed is not love. Apologies after cruelty are not respect. I only nodded, and in that moment, he understood. The inheritance was gone, the respect was gone, and his last chance was gone too. I breathed deep, feeling the cool air on my face. My journey had been long, full of pain and sacrifice, but in the end, I walked away with my dignity. That was worth more than all the land, money, and shops in the world. He threw shoes at my head to show me I was nothing, but I showed him the truth. I took away the future he thought was guaranteed, and now he is the one left begging, not me. That is my quiet victory.